Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Chase from BiblioCommons, and I'm here with Anne Hood, author of the upcoming book, An Italian Wife. And we're here to just hang out this afternoon and talk a little bit about Anne and her work. Hi, Anne.
Hi, how are you, Stephanie?
Good. So I thought that when we were preparing, just kind of testing, we talked a little bit about all of your travels, but I wanted to bring up something that I read in your bio that I thought was really interesting, that you have been a flight attendant. And that you, so I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, but also because you talked about kind of how it gave you time to start to explore writing, and that you mentioned you would, write on the subway on the way out to JFK and write on kind of the long transatlantic and the international flights. So I wonder if you just want to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm old enough that when I was a flight attendant, it was still kind of glamorous. Like, you would go through airports like Heathrow Airport or something with a whole 747 crew of like 16 people, and little children would stop and point, and it was really kind of exciting and glamorous. I mean, the work was the work. You were still serving 300 passengers, for 18 hours or something. But I wanted to be a writer since I was really young, but I come from a town that really did not know how to support a kid doing that. They didn't know. We didn't have creative writing camps and creative writing classes and all of that. And so I was looking for a way to have life experiences to make me a better writer. That was my kind of youthful idea. I know, of course, now that Eudora Welty was more correct when she said all a writer has to do is sit on her own front porch. But I thought I had to run with the bulls. I didn't know. So being a flight attendant seemed like an exciting way to get life experience, to travel, and just get out of my little, I grew up in Rhode Island. I went to college in Rhode Island, and I just was ready. I was bursting at the seams. Mm-hmm. And so I interviewed. I started in 1978. I was hired by a bunch of airlines, but I wanted to fly internationally, so I flew with the now defunct TWA. And I did domestic for a while, but then I finally got my dream of being based at Kennedy Airport and doing international flights. But I had been writing my whole life, so I didn't realize at first, hey, this is a great job for writing. But I only worked between 12 and 15 days a month, so I had a lot of free time, and actually got my master's while I was a flight attendant. Got my master's at NYU, not in writing, in American literature. But I wrote my first novel basically in galleys of 747s. Yeah.
I think that's a great story.
It's a little unusual. I know one other writing flight attendant. Mary Higgins Clark was a flight attendant.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
She dated me, but she worked for Delta.
So I think most of us who are librarians first kind of really came to know your work through the Knitting Circle, which I know is kind of very intensely personal book for you that was very difficult to write. Mm-hmm. But it's, since it came out, I think in 2007, correct?
Yep. Yes.
I think it's just been a mainstay of book club books and, the kinds of books that I think we often see are, the kind of book we often see patrons return to again and again. And
that's lovely.
I wonder if you want to share a little bit about kind of that story, the Knitting Circle, and if you feel like you want to share a little bit about kind of how it helped you through a difficult time in your own life.
Sure. Well, my first novel came out in 1987. It was called Somewhere Off the Coast of Maine, which is still, it never went out of print, which still shocks me, but it's just been one of those books, kind of like the way you described the Knitting Circle. So I was blessed and cursed to have that experience with a first novel, because I wrote like 4 or 5 others, and everybody's like, no, we know Somewhere Off the Coast of Maine. But I was a full-time writer. I did a lot of magazine work. I had a lot of columns at various times, one for Glamour and parenting. I always say if you looked at my columns, you could see where I was in my life, single woman, crazed mother, whatever. So I was working, kind of eking out a living, writing novels every 2 or 3 years, and doing a lot of magazine work. I'd moved from New York to Rhode Island to marry my husband, and we had 2 kids, Sam, who was 8, and Grace was 5. This was in 2002. When Grace got a virulent form of strep. I mean, it's the same strep, like strep throat. It's not staph. It's not the flesh-eating strep. It's none of the weird ones. It's very basic. And in very rare cases, it bypasses the throat and attacks your organs. And she died in 36 hours. In the aftermath of that, I could not read or write. Language, which really had always been my comfort, even when I was a tiny kid, reading and writing bad haikus is what got me through teenage life. So it was the first time in my life, but really when I needed it the most, language wasn't. It was like that part of my brain actually stopped. I have since learned that isn't that uncommon, especially for people who use words or language as part of what they do. Many people after loss find journaling and writing workshops and things help them, but if language is your thing, it can be the thing that stops. And so I say for 6 months I was really losing my mind with grief. I mean, luckily I had a great son, Sam, who turned 9 in that period, and my husband and wonderful friends and family, so I had a support system, but everybody went off into their lives every day, and I was left at home virtually with nothing to do, because if I couldn't read or write or take care of my little girl, that's how my days had been filled. So I thought I was going to lose my mind. And what's kind of strange is I didn't tell people. It was almost like my dirty little secret. And then one day I confessed to these friends, and they both happen to be visual artists, and they both live in Portland, Oregon, by the way. And they said, stop thinking and do something with your hands. Now, the only class in my entire life I did not get an A in was home economics, sewing. And so the fact that I jumped at the idea to do something crafty always makes me laugh in retrospect, but it really was a sign of my desperation. And that something was learning to knit. And I started knitting October 2002, 6 months after Grace died. I still knit today. I can tell when I'm sad or nervous or anxious or whatever because I knit up a storm. It still serves as a real soothing sort of comfort place for me. And I knit almost full time for about 6 months, and reading came back to me. And in another 3 or 4 months, I was sitting and knitting, and I thought if I could teach the world to knit, I know I sound like a Coke commercial, there'd be no more war, and people would be happy. And I had this whole kind of crazy thought. And then I said, that's ridiculous, and I knit some more. And then I thought, well, no, it isn't, because if I could write about it, it would be like teaching people this magical thing. And that day, the Knitting Circle was born, the book, The Knitting Circle. It was about 1.5 years after Grace died, so I was not yet ready to write my own story, which I later did in a memoir called Comfort. But at that time, the last thing I wanted to do was revisit that time. And so I created this kind of magical knitting circle that I wished I could join. I'm a bad group person. So I created this magical knitting circle, and I still get emails saying, is there a space in the knitting circle? I need it.
Oh, that is so touching. Well, and I think what's wonderful about that book too is, as you described, I'm not always a great group person either, but that kind of great tradition of pulling together, right, to help people that we see in quilting bees and things like that, and the ability to have a group where you could be alone and be an individual and but yet be part of this greater group. And I have to think, knitting is the thing that I gave up when I had children, because I realized I had too much stuff on my plate.
That's right.
But the thing I do remember was my husband just saying, I can't believe you create something out of nothing, which is such a magical thing about that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what are you working on right now as a knitting project?
I am working on a blanket. I could almost show it to you. It's in the next room. Because I did so much traveling this summer, as you and I were discussing before we began, I wanted something that was kind of portable. Now, a blanket does not sound portable, I understand, but this blanket starts with 4 stitches, so it just kept growing, and it just reached
like a triangle?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then it starts, and then it decreases, so you get a big diamond shape.
Yeah. Well, so we did talk a little bit, just before we get to your new book, do you want to talk just a little bit about the places that you've traveled? As I said, you've been kind of some really amazing places just in 2014 alone.
I know. It's been a wonderful summer, really. I started it by teaching 3 weeks in Chamonix, France, which was just great. And I took my 10-year-old daughter, Annabelle, with me. And Annabelle goes to a French-American school. It's a real lycée. And so she was like the translator for the whole conference. It was excellent.
Perfect.
She speak French, and who knows what she was saying, but it was fabulous. And I taught, who doesn't want to teach in the summer on Cape Cod? That was great. And then I was in Portland, wonderful Portland, Oregon, for a week at the Tin House Writers Workshop. and then a week in wonderful Portland, Maine. So I did both Portlands. And then my cousin and Annabelle and I just took a road trip to Charleston, South Carolina,
Hmm.
just to eat at the restaurant Husk. We're big foodies. We had read about it several years ago in the New Yorker, and it was worth the 17-hour drive. It was fabulous.
Wow.
And then I just got back on Sunday from London, where my novel, The Obituary Writer, just came out. So they're like a year behind
Hmm.
publishing. And so we were just there for the publication of that. So it's been a great summer. And it's actually been a great year for The Obituary Writer because it came out
Hmm.
in Barcelona, in Spain, in February, and we were able to go there for that. So it's been really nice.
Wow. What is it like now to have to start to thinking about, kind of promoting two books? Because so your book here in the U.S., An Italian Wife, that comes
Yes.
out in September, so in,
Yeah.
just the next month. So now you have to kind of advocate for two books at the same time.
Yeah, I always pause, especially in Europe, because some countries are two books behind, and then they say, "Tell us about your book," and it always takes me a minute. Now, what am I talking about? But it's exciting because it gives me the sense of them still being out. You know what I mean? They're alive out there, which is great.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about An Italian Wife. So for me, you had on your blog post some great quotes from Wally Lamb and Adriana Trignani, kind of just talking about the story, and it was kind of described as a multi-generational family saga. So I thought,
Hmm.
what made you want to kind of, and that it's the thing that I really liked about Wally Lamb's quote is he said he loved how the stories revolved around the matriarch, and that it
Yeah,
reminds him a lot of kind of what he liked about Olive Kitteridge, in that kind of the role that a woman plays in kind of managing, right, the
yeah,
family saga. So I wonder if
yeah.
you want to talk just a little bit about An Italian Wife and kind of where you got the inspiration from. And
Well, I'm Italian American, and
Mhm.
it's not something that I've written that much about. I mean, an essay here and there, maybe touched on it. I mean, I wrote an essay that became quite popular because it had my mother's meatball recipe in it, about my failure to learn to make the perfect meatball as my mother can do. So every now and then it kind of pops up, but I've never really written about it to any great extension. So about 14 years ago, I was at Yaddo, the artist colony in
Mhm.
Saratoga Springs, New York, to finish a novel. And I did that thing like when I used to write term papers. I didn't want to write that novel. And I had just before I left had a conversation with my mother about her grandmother, so my great grandmother,
Mhm.
who had been a huge supporter of Mussolini, as many Italian
Interesting.
Americans were, and
Mhm.
that she sent all of her gold to Italy to support Mussolini. So she had just told me that story. So I thought, great time waste, right? I'm going to go to the Saratoga Springs Library and read about, did Italian Americans all do that? And anyway,
Mhm.
from this exploration, I started reading biographies of Mussolini and immigrant, nonfiction studies about immigration. And I wrote a short story called Dear Mussolini, which is one of the chapters in An
Mhm.
Italian Life. And that story went on to win a couple prizes and stuff. And I was very excited about the family I'd created. And they're not my family, but I was trying to
Mhm.
capture the Italian American immigrant experience. And I was really a part of it, although I'm twice removed. You know, my mom was born in the States.
Mhm.
I grew up in a neighborhood where everyone spoke Italian. It was the little old
Mhm.
ladies in the black kerchiefs. Everybody had grapevines and garden,
Mhm.
and and we still have a lot of old traditions that are dying out. So I think part of it was, as my aunts and uncles were growing older and dying, to try to capture what that family was like when I was growing up, even before that. Um, and so every time I had a deadline, basically, I wrote a chapter, and they were they were out of order. They were great approach avoidance things, but my grand idea was an immigrant family, Italian American immigrants, spanning three wars.
Mhm.
And so the stories in my mind were centered around World War One, World War Two, and Vietnam, but not on the war zone, not on the battlefield, but the women at
Mhm.
home.
Mhm.
And I loved the idea of the matriarch because I don't mean to be stereotypical, but Italian American families are very matriarchal, and
Mhm.
mine certainly was. And now my mom's been the matriarch of of the family now for quite a while, and I watched how the matriarch goes from front and center to kind of fading in the background. And so, as you know, in the middle third of the book, Josephine is really always in the background, and no one's really paying that much attention to her, listening to her. Her granddaughters are embarrassed by her, and but she comes back at the end. So a lot of it was about aging as well.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, I mean, again, where you have the books that you have written, do make such great books to share, in a group setting or with readers. What do you think will be the thing that people are really drawn to about this? Do you think it will be kind of the matriarch, or are there other elements you think that will really be a draw?
Yeah, I think that although it's about an immigrant experience, I think the experience of an immigrant or of immigration is feeling other and the sense of alienation. But I think that's everyone's experience. We have all felt that. And I think when you look at all of the generations in the book, you see how they feel other, not just because they're Italian American, but one woman because she's a widow, and other women feel threatened by her. One woman because she was adopted. A young girl because she doesn't fit into the social world around her in the 70s. She's not part of that. And so I think people will really relate to, yeah, that's me. Maybe I'm not of an immigrant family, but I have felt that alienation and trying to assimilate to everything, to culture, to school, to work, to the neighborhood. So I think that's the most common experience. But I think in all my books, one of the things I really like exploring is just the role of women, the role of women in families and in the world around them. And as with the obituary writer, I really liked looking at that in different time periods. And so I'm sure that that's something that will resonate. Most of my readers are women, so I think it'll resonate for them.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. For those of you who are listening, we've recorded this, and so when we're done, it will go up in all of our BiblioCommons catalogs on the video tab for Anne's books, so you'll be able to see it there too, Anne, and I hope that readers will find it and kind of really appreciate the little nuggets you've given us about insights into your books. But thank you so much, and everybody, the Italian Wife, I believe, is at the very end of September.
September 2nd, so it's right around the corner.
Oh, it is. Yeah. So I had added a 5 to the end for some reason. I had September 25th. So in a week or so. So
I just got my first copy yesterday, Stephanie. It fell through my door slot. I was so excited.
Oh, well, congratulations. So happy almost book birthday.
Thank you.
When everybody gets back from Labor Day and their kids go back to school, this is the thing that they can do on their first free day, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Of course. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you, Anne, and to our listeners.
Great. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.